What I would like to do is to start off with questions, but we've got a bit more time this year. Usually we have quite long presentations, and then the questions are quite short. This year we've actually had a very, very informative presentation, but we've actually got more time for questions and for a discussion. So, as I said earlier, what I'd like to do is to invite people to ask questions. Try to keep the questions short, please, if you can, so that we can get as many questions in as possible. But I can assure you that Achilleas will give you as long a response as possible. I'm going to ask the first question, though. As chairman, it's my prerogative. And the question I wanted to ask Achilleas, just to clarify something for me. You said that the compensation committee is actually a Turkish device, in that what it's effectively done is to imply a de-recognition of the so-called TRNC because it's been set up by Turkey. Now, I have always assumed that this compensation committee is illegal, but the reason I've assumed it's illegal is because it breaches the so-called constitution of the TRNC. What I think the TRNC constitution says, and I say TRNC shorthand, not because I agree with it, but I think the Constitution says, it's 169.
185.
185, okay, thank you. What I think it says is something along the lines of all Greek Cypriot property is now owned by the so-called TRNC. So, if that is what the Turkish Cypriot Constitution says, how can they then set up a commission which is going to return property to Greek Cypriots? It's unconstitutional. So could you just explain to me where Turkey fits in and where the TRNC constitution fits in?
This is a very technical and legal point, but I'm glad that Nick raised it because that is the oddity of it. Right. Article 185 of the TRNC, the subordinate local administration, actually refers to the abandoned Greek Cypriot properties in 1974, if of course they were abandoned. And the ownership of these properties vests now in the TRNC. That means that they, in their own legal system, this compensation commission will allegedly be returning back to Greek Cypriots property that actually belongs to the state, because the constitution says so. And for me, that is the biggest proof that this compensation commission cannot be effective and actually cannot be in accordance with the convention or even with legal order. There is one element even higher in this, in that I'm glad you pointed out that these are Turkish commissions set up. It is Turkey that exists there. And Turkey, as an occupying power under international humanitarian law, is precluded from expropriating properties belonging to the indigenous population. It may requisition property for their military needs and other matters of that nature, but it cannot expropriate property. So even that article, Article 185 of the TRNC, subordinate local administration, is in itself in conflict with international humanitarian law. And that is why we have this range of arguments, which I can assure you are about a box file thick, and I have tried to condense in a few minutes in this presentation. But we can talk about this for hours and hours. I just want to make it simple and for you to understand.
But to put it simply, it's an illegal commission, so when the Turks come along to us and say, well, you don't need to bring any more cases to the European Court of Human Rights, because we've got this wonderful compensation commission, we say, no, it's complete nonsense. It's an illegal entity which can't do anything.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And just to put the record straight, it is not the first time that Turkey sets up this kind of compensation commission. We tend to think in Cyprus that things only happen to us. That is incorrect. Turkey has already set up such a compensation commission in southeastern part of Turkey, where there were about 1,500 cases pending against the Kurdish population, which had been, against whom human rights violations had been inflicted, not just in relation to disappearances and killings, but also in relation to property. The European Court took note of this compensation commission and actually referred to it about 1,500 cases. If you look up Human Rights Watch, there was a very interesting report last December where it points out that actually Turkey had set up a trick, because this compensation commission in the end proved out not to be effective, and it did not award compensation, nor did it give justice to any of the victims that have been referred to it. I believe that what is being done in Cyprus is a similar setup. I am not in favor of anybody applying to this commission. I do not think that is the correct approach to it. And I believe that Turkey is setting us up for a similar scenario, whereby some people who, for their own reason, decided to go, may be given some amounts, not very high, certainly not in accordance to the amounts awarded in Xenidis Arestis or Loizidou, and it will try and use that as evidence of the effectiveness of the system. I think we should not fall for that. I think it is going to prove to be a fiasco, and I think that cases before Strasbourg, the Strasbourg court, will continue, because Turkey is simply violating people's human rights in the occupied area.
Thank you, Achilleas. Okay, I'm going to shut up now. Question time.
Yes, Mr. Chair, first of all, to congratulate Mr. Demetriades. Such a complicated matter and explained in 40 minutes, 45 minutes in simple terms. Two questions. The first one, let us say Turkey says, with regard to Loizidis' case and Xenidis' case, okay, from such a date, you can come and stay. And the so-called TRNC says, yes, of course. Doesn't mean that from the legal point of view, the whole case is disposed of. And the second question, with regard to the Oram's case, can you risk an opinion about the result? Because up to now, at least the impression I get is that most people of the legal profession, they are more or less 100% that everything will go according to what we want.
Okay, it's easy to answer the Orams because I'm not an expert in that field. I have read about it, I have not seen the pleadings, and it will be very difficult for me to guess what the European Court of Justice will decide. It's something that is not my expertise. If you excuse me, I will not reply to that, because if I say something, it will be rather silly, and I really don't want to do that. Now, what about whether Mrs. Loizidou and Mrs. Aresti are allowed to go back? Well, first of all, we have to ask them if they would like to go back. I cannot say for them. But it's not just going back. It's also issues about safety, issues about the term used in Article 1 of Protocol number 1 of the Convention is peaceful enjoyment of possessions. The word peaceful has a meaning which you understand. So if you cannot peacefully enjoy, if you can only enjoy, as your argument is, then you are not up to the standard of the Convention. Such steps must be taken that there is a peaceful enjoyment, and we can discuss about that. And I hope that answers your question without getting into the details of what peaceful means. Yes.
Yeah, I just want to go back to the Madis case.
The Madis
case. You said that unfortunately he died, but his next of kin will continue.
Absolutely.
Yeah. From where is he going to get the compensation? Can you clarify that for me?
Turkey.
Yeah, but which commission is going to?
No, the European Court.
European Court.
The position now is that a number of these cases have been frozen pending the determination of a procedural objection that has been raised in relation to a judge appointed by the Turkish government. This judge is also the Chief Justice in the subordinate local administration, and Turkey appointed them as the Turkish judge in 38 cases. One of them is Demetriades. We expect in September that the court will take a view of this matter and will decide either to allow him to continue continue as a Turkish judge, or not to allow him to continue because he's part of the TRNC system and therefore cannot give an opinion.
But he's not part of the so-called Commission for Compensation?
No, certainly not, certainly not. So once that is sorted out, I believe that the Demetriades case is the oldest and it will be the next one to come up, and the court will have to consider, for any of you who remember where Rock Ruby is in Kyrenia, next to it there were a number of houses. All that area is a military zone, and actually the top Turkish military brass lives there. It is their homes, and a number of those houses are occupied by the top brass. And there will have to be a determination about his house, what is the rent that he should have received from 1990, when it is the time that Turkey accepted the compulsory jurisdiction of the court, and therefore the court can deal with it, until today, plus interest. And that amount will be an award against Turkey, and then it will have 3 months to pay, and if they do not pay, then you go to the Committee of Ministers and you do what was done in Loizidou, and hopefully at the end of the day they will have to pay up. The Compensation Commission does not come in this equation at all, even though Turkey tries to introduce it and present it as some sort of remedy, which I believe is not up to standard.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. The point about it taking 18 years before a decision is reached, the law of precedent, I'm not a lawyer, but obviously a lot of people in here are. The law of precedent, doesn't it say that once a decision has been established, then all other cases which are similar or have parallels with that case will proceed a lot quicker? So if some of us decide to go down the Loizidis route, should it take 18 years? Shouldn't it take a lot less?
Well, we have progress, you'll be surprised to hear. Loizidou took from 1989 to 1998, when judgment came out, and then until 2003. Arestis, on the other hand, only took 8 years. We started
I got my years wrong, sorry.
Yeah, no, it doesn't matter. I'm just showing that the time has become smaller. But yes, precedent helps. Yes, precedent is not as binding, if I may use that expression, as it is in the common law system, but precedent is recognized in the Strasbourg courts. The problem is that Turkey has been coming up with every sort of political trick it could come up with in order to delay these cases. For example, when the interstate application was under consideration, and that took 4 or 5 years, all other individual cases were frozen. Now, that was partly Turkey's ambition because it didn't allow them to go, but it was also the court's approach because they didn't want a case which was as important as the interstate to be tried and have other little cases in parallel. They dealt with that, established the principle on the highest level, on Grand Chamber, and so we have that precedent upon which we can base our arguments. And that was helpful in Arestis because at the level of finding a violation, it was much easier for us. What Turkey had done there was raise issues in relation to FGAF, as I have explained. So every time they try to come up with something new, and every time we have to deal with it. But slowly we are doing away with most of these arguments. But of course Turkey is also playing a political game rather successfully in delaying the enforcement of these actions. And we can only try in order to combat this.
Thank you for your lovely speech. I was involved with these matters with late Demetriades and I know Demetriades very well. The decision about Titina Loizidou, according to Katemerini, one of the Greek eminent papers, is the best decision ever made for Cyprus, come out for Cyprus. Now, we are all refugees, okay? A lot of them, they want to take part and prosecute Turkey, but they don't have the funds and the means. So we urge the government and our leaders to set up a fund and a team. This is the biggest pressure we can put on Turkey, and this is I think, the cornerstone for a justice solution of Cyprus, because property issue is the alpha and omega of Cyprus problem, I think, besides the constitution, isn't it? So if we, all of us, apply and prosecute Turkey in a mass manner, even the European Court will be fed up with us, with thousands of applications in even Turkey. It doesn't matter how long it will take, is it? So we sleep, we're sleeping. We'll be sleeping. 2, 3 people, it's nothing. We need thousands of people.
I think we're sleeping. I am very disappointed. I am extremely disappointed that all this good work has gone to no avail. I don't know why people are not pursuing their rights.
Because, I'll tell you, some they're thinking about the financial issues. And I was involved with Titina Loizidou. I was president of SIDOP. I don't know if you know SIDOP. Titina Loizidou was a member of us. And others said, we went to Lugaidis, the attorney, and we asked him, we urged him to put money. And he said, we cannot do it as a government. But the politicians and the parliament, they can find a way to set the fund.
Let me get this straight. I have no faith in any government. That is my starting point as a human rights lawyer. I do not trust the government. Okay, that's point 1. Point 2. If tomorrow morning somebody broke into your apartment and he's a trespasser, you will not go to the government to ask them to get him out. You will sue him and you will make a case there. The problem with these cases is that everybody is waiting for everybody else to do the work. And every time we're saying, oh, the government must come up with the funds, or the government must do that or do this. I put it to you simply. It's your property. It's not the government's, it's not anybody else. Are you interested enough to pursue it in a proper way? And you are entitled to say yes or no. I will not judge you. It is not my judgment call. My position is, are people interested enough in pursuing their claims against Turkey with these cases or not? That is the very simple question.
The answer is yes.
No, the answer is not yes. The answer is no.
No, it's yes.
The answer is no, and the proof of it is that people have not done it so far. And I will not buy this story that the government will have to come and pay for this. The cost of doing these cases is not prohibitive. The cost of doing these cases can be on a percentage with the lawyer you can appoint. And I do not believe that in this day and age, the costs that are floating are prohibitive. They may have been difficult for Loizidou to start the case because there was a lot of work to be done, but in others it is not. I am sick and tired of listening for people to wait for the government to do a fund to pay for their own legal costs. The dilemma is that simple. Are you interested enough to pursue your properties, or are you simply going to leave them in the expectation that Deus ex machina will come and solve your problem? Do you want to do it? Do it. If you don't want to do it, fine. That's not an issue. But let's not pass the bucket on to somebody else. It is our responsibility, and I will go one step further. It is also your responsibility towards the previous generation, which handed this property over to you, because from my family, you never give up your property unless you have to sell and you can't afford it. So, if you want to pass your property on to the next generation, you really have to do something more than just sit around to wait for the government to sponsor your legal actions. It is your property. If you want to pursue it, do it. If not, that's fine. It's still yours.
Who is the guarantor of our property in Cyprus? Our government, isn't it? Because I'm not going with labor.
Yeah, but I'm not going to get into dialogue on this one. That's my position. If you wanted to get into a political discussion, we can. The position here is simple.
But what I'm going to say...
let me finish on
Let
this one.
Achilleas finish, please.
Let me take on this one, because I feel very strongly, and I've been doing this for 19 years, and I get the same question. Oh, the government should do this. Well, what are you going to do about it? Because the government ain't doing anything for you. Whether it's this government, or that government, or the next government, or the previous one. The point is, do you feel that you care enough about this to go find yourself a lawyer and pay him to do something about it? Because that's the issue. If you don't care about it enough, you're not going to do it. If you care about it enough, you will. Period. And I'm not afraid to take the political discussion, but but it is not now. After we finish, I will deal with it, because it is not fair.
There is. Sorry, but don't, excuse me. You've had your say. There's lots of other people wanting to ask questions. But I mean, the one thing I would say on lobby's behalf is we had Achilleas here a few years ago to try to encourage us to bring cases. One of the biggest problems we have is that everyone thinks they own the property. When you ask them to produce the title deeds, they don't own the property. A grandparent does. You then have to work out how that grandparent divided the property amongst the children. There is no paperwork. You can't start these cases until you get your own house in order. And that means making sure that whatever property you've got is actually yours. Everyone thinks they own the property. Legally, they might not. And you can't bring one of these cases and see it lose in the European Court of Human Rights. And that is from experience of trying to bring these cases through lobbying.
I mean, Nick, what you say is fundamental, and I'm sorry for not mentioning before. If you do not have a piece of paper from the Republic of Cyprus saying that you are the owner, you haven't got a leg to stand on. You have to decide that you are the owner of this land. And the only piece of paper that decides that is a title deed or a certificate of ownership, in some cases, from the Republic of Cyprus that says it belongs to you. It may very well belong to your grandfather, who is now dead, and the grandfather has 2 or 3 children, and then they have 2 or 3 children each. So you have to figure out who owns what in your family. The next step you have to do is go find your brother or your cousin or what have you and decide that all of you together bring these actions. There is no point going all the way to Strasbourg for 1/6 of your property if you are 6 brothers. And if these 6 brothers cannot get together to agree to bring a common action for their property in Strasbourg, it's not worth discussing. If you can't get your act together with your own family, don't bother any lawyer, because you simply are not good enough. You have to sit down and figure it out. And you figure it out not because your grandfather or your aunt or it doesn't work that way. You got to work it out if you own it, and not because somebody said it belongs to you. I've had people come in honesty and say, oh, this was promised to me and this was given to me. And I said, where's the piece of paper? Well, we are working on it. Well, when are you going to do it? Well, we're still working on it. Well, do that. No. And if you don't want to do the case, don't do it. Do it for your own family. If your own family doesn't know who owns what, you've had it. Let alone the cases of people who say the land belongs to them and there is a dispute between people as to who owns it. I'm just talking about the family. And the procedure is very simple. If your grandfather has died, you issue letters of administration, the Achilleas. And if the property is only in the occupied area, you just need a certificate from the Muhtar to get this done. The land registration office is very accommodating, and you have to get the family tree in order. And there is no problem to get people from all over the world to do this. It is something you owe it to your parents or to your grandparents. If you don't get your property in order, not to do a case, forget the case for the moment. Get your affairs in order. These are valuable assets which now may not be worth a lot because of the occupation, but in the future it will. There is nothing that can take away this property for you, of course, assuming you can prove you are the owners. A week ago, I started a case, got publicity, which was started 5 years ago, and has to do with the right of Greeks to inherit in Constantinople. We have started a case on that, and there you see how properties are disappearing and how generations cannot be found. Because the Turks know the trick. The family dies, there is no claim, the land belongs to the person who is in possession. And you come back 50 years later and say, ah, no, I had a grandfather who owned this. Well, try and prove it. And don't forget the evidence. The evidence of all these people. What's the description? How much it costs? What did they produce? Where it was? These things must be documented for the sake of history, even family history, so that you do have a claim to this property when the time comes. And even if you do not do a case, at least do it for the next generation of your family.
Thank you very much, Achilleas. Okay, it's Aligi, George, Dimitris, this gentleman here, next door.
It's an addendum to the point you were just making regarding people taking personal responsibility for their property. There seems to have been some sort of conflicting information given to the public, because the last piece of information that most of us remember is our government telling us don't make personal claims because it actually weakens the position of our government against Turkey. That's on the one hand, and then on the other hand, of course, we have the lawyers saying you must take personal responsibility. Can you please clarify this point? And if your case is the true case, why isn't it being made more commonly known to the public? Point number one. The next question, which is to do with the point you were saying about people coming 50 years later to claim land, is there any sort of statute of limitations with regard to reclaiming land that has been illegally possessed, providing you have proof?
Okay, second question first. Statute of limitation exists. Our argument is it's a continuing violation, therefore the statute of limitation doesn't kick in. That's the way around it. We did it in Lezidu, it should work in Constantinople as well, and anybody has the same claim. Question about government. I mean, this sounds very bad, but if you do human rights against government, your motto should be, all government is evil. I don't speak for any government. I never did, I never will, as far as I'm concerned anyway. But I mean, the Cyprus government has, whichever government, I'm not referring to the current or previous, they have taken political decisions on these matters. My point is that you shouldn't take that for granted. You are individuals and these are your properties. And I don't believe for a moment that just because the government says something, you will blindly follow it. My approach is it's your property. Now, are you going to wait for the government to tell you what to do with it? It is that simple. And there is this mass sort of following as to we should do this or we should do that. Maybe I'm completely wrong. Maybe what I say is rubbish. But what I do want to tell you is think about it. Consider it. At the end of the day, it's your property. You may decide you don't want to do anything about it. Fine. But do make that consciously. Don't just wait there until somebody tells you to do or not to do something. The point is, it's yours. If you want it to continue to be yours, you should do something about it. And then again, doing nothing is always an option.
Excuse me, we want to do this in order. George. No, excuse me, we've heard them already. George.
Yeah, it's on the same subject. You already have answered one of the questions. If I remember well, going back a few years when you first talked to us about properties, I think probably you suggested as well, amongst others, that we shouldn't put too many cases forward because we will clog the system, number one. And number two, we should put forward the strongest cases so that we have some cases decided.
Well, I'll tell you what I suggested, and I said it before and I will say it now. At the time, I had 4 categories of cases. First case was the Turkish army. Any property that the Turkish army was in it, we should have hit them. There is no defense for the Turkish army. Second category was the fenced-up city of Famagusta. What's the point? They cannot defend it. Third category were properties of high economic value. Hotels, factories, land, large lands, large pieces of land. And fourth was everybody else with their home. Not that their home was not important, but in order to make a fight, you must have priorities. And these 4 priorities I have consistently presented as to be the plan of action, and I have been consistently ignored. But that's fine, I don't mind about that. At the end of the day, it is the individual decision of every person to decide what to do with their property. At the bottom line is, what do you want to do? Maybe that didn't answer your question.
Yes, it has partly. I mean, also, most people will fall into the 4th category, I would imagine, like myself. Now, that's number one. Are you saying now all fourth category people should take action? Are you?
I gave you the priorities, and if you're in number 4, I mean, it's long enough.
Is that the same advice if the properties are now occupied by individuals that we don't know enough about? I mean, they say they bought the property.
Okay, you need to take a decision. You need to take a decision whether you are going on a person to state or on a person to person approach. The first one, no, you need to consider these things. The first one is like Loizidou, like Arestis, it's against Turkey. The second one is like Apostolidis. Apostolidis, we still haven't got a result on it, so we're not sure if it's working. The first one, we have some results, and it is a way which is relatively simple, and we've known the path. Whether you're in the 4th category or not is a question for you to decide. I've been saying these 4 categories for, I don't know, God, I can't even remember.
Since 98.
98.
Apostolidis have British tenants, so we have third from England, so it's not the same.
Practically, you have no effect. I mean, even if you get a judgment against the Turkish tenant, are you going to go to Turkey and execute the judgment?
But if they're Turks from England,
that is my question. I mean, you said take action against who? We can't take action against Turkey. Because
you can take. There is no doubt about taking action against Turkey. For what there is doubt is whether you're going to take also this approach against the individual who is dealing. I mean, I can think of a chain of international hotels that could be occupying your property. That judgment could be executed on assets of this international chain. But this needs a lot of research, and you need to be sure where you're going. That requires more information.
And finally, if someone is taking action, are you advising taking action against all properties he owns, or the most important ones?
No, everything. Not only his, but also his brothers, and also his father, and also his mother, and the whole family. If you present the case as a unit, it makes more sense economically, and it also makes more sense from the property point of view. Sometimes people inherit properties in a quarter or a third, depending how the families are. This way you have the whole property with you.
Dimitri.
My question is the same more or less like the previous one. It's further up to this category. We know that the owner, not the owners, the people who are taking the property there, who are living in the property. The trespassers, they are not the army, but there are some Kuvaliti, either from Bulgaria or Romania, or this, but they are Turks. Can we take up with a case against them?
No, it's pointless. Simply pointless.
See, that's the...
Yeah, but that is pointless on the person to person. It is not pointless on the person to state. This is what I'm telling you.
Dr. Leg, let's be clear about this, because we're using legal terminology here. I mean, let's be clear. What you're saying is that in the case of Demetriades, where he's got Bulgarian colonists living in his house in Ambrosios, he could bring an action against Turkey in the European Court of Human Rights, but even though he could bring an action against these Bulgarian colonists, there's no point, because they've got no assets to enforce against.
Exactly. Because at the end of the day, you will have a judgment against Mr. X from Bulgaria. You will take that judgment and you will go to Bulgaria to execute it. If he has no assets in Bulgaria, and the assumption is he has no assets, and that's the reason why he left, because otherwise, if he was rich in his country, he wouldn't have left. So he left because he had no assets. Since he had no assets, this judgment will be worthless. So why do it in the first place and start with that? That is why I say it's pointless. Not that you can't get it, you can, but at the end of the day, what are you going to do with it?
Okay.
The Republic of Cyprus issues documentation for ownership for part ownership, say half a house. Why is that a problem in bringing up an action if you are only half owner of property?
Because you would look very strange before the European Court saying I'm only making a claim for half the property and you can't get your act together to get the other half of the property with you. I would look, if I were a judge and you came with half of the property, I'd say, this is really strange.
Well, I mean, there is horizontal property. I mean, there is first floor belonging to one child, second floor to another.
No, the reason I'm saying this is that, say you are brother, there are 3 brothers, and the property has been inherited in 1/3 each, and there are 10 plots of 1/3 each. If I were a judge looking at this, and you only came with 1/3, I would say this is a bit strange. These people, these 3 brothers, cannot get together and make a claim for the whole of the property. Now, this is quite distinct in a case where you've bought a flat, for example, and that is differently is reflected in that way. My example relates to a family in which the portions belong to individual members of the family, and that's why I say you don't look at the individual, you look at the family, and that way you encapsulate the whole property that belongs to the family.
The other question I was asked was the compensation. The so-called compensation committee was only for compensating with money, not for returning property in the north.
Well, the Turks say that they can give you restoration, that's the return. I say that's rubbish.
Okay. There hasn't been a class action where the property issue is not paramount, but to establish or re-establish a community is. So therefore, we're not talking about pounds, euros or dollars, but the right to return. So that may be more advantageous to us and more acceptable.
The notion of class action does not exist in the Strasbourg system. The closest you can get is the notion of an interstate application, which the Cyprus government has already done. You see, the Strasbourg system was designed after the Second World War as an effort to protect human rights, and it introduced this revolutionary concept whereby an individual could bring a claim against his own government in a supranational court. You go behind 1950 when the convention organs were established. This was a totally revolutionary system. Before, protection of human rights was the responsibility of the state. So if your property had been expropriated, for example, in a foreign land, you would go to your Ministry of Foreign Affairs, you would say, I am a national of this country, please take some action on government level. What Strasbourg did was to create this notion of an individual application. And it is by using that notion that we have been able to make these claims. So these class actions, unfortunately, are not known to the system.
Okay, there was a question over here, I think.
It's following Dimitri's question that someone who's living in someone's house from abroad, what if the house was demolished? Would that apply again to?
The application against Turkey is for loss of use of your home. And the way you calculate is you get the value of that home in 1990, that's the time, that's the period that you can start the calculation. And you take that value by taking the 74 value and you relate it to the index. There is an index of how properties have increased in the Republic. I mean, you just get the table from the statistics department and it's so much % every year. You take that number, you bring it up to 1990, and then from there onwards you make all the increases. And you add interest on the amount. And that's how you calculate the claim. If it is land where there is nothing on it, you claim ground rent. Ground rent is anything between 3 to 6% of the value of the land every year. And these are simple calculations that a valuer can do for you. It's not difficult.
I got the second letter from the European Court, which says you may not need to attend. What follows after that?
Say that again.
I got the second letter from the European Court.
Second letter?
Well, what's the first letter?
Well, I took Turkey to the court.
Are you applying?
Yes.
Okay.
And it says you may not need to attend.
Correct.
What follows after that?
Well, no, the reason they wrote to you may not need to attend is that the Strasbourg court does not necessarily hold hearings. Here, when you go to court, you expect that you will have a hearing. In Strasbourg, the norm is not for hearings to take place. The whole procedure is done through documents. You send affidavits, the other side sends its comments, you reply, and it is not necessarily the norm that a hearing will take place. Hearings, not always, hearings take place mostly in cases which are pilot or are novel points.
So president.
So exactly. So in cases where a precedent has been established, it is unlikely that you will hold a hearing. The court will consider your submissions, Turkish submissions, and will make a decision on the basis of the precedent.
Could you perhaps just tell us something very briefly about your case? Why did you decide to bring it? Where is the property?
In Morphoria, it involves orange crows, houses, and each one of the family had to do it individually because we didn't have any jointly properties.
Well done. I'm pleased to hear that someone's bringing a case like that. Okay, any more questions?
Well, I've been in England for quite a few years now. How do I go about it to start with? Because there's no use of going to a solicitor over here, whether a Greek or an English or a Jew solicitor and asking to take over my case. Most probably it's better to apply through a solicitor in Cyprus. Well, in Cyprus, is it, are there certain solicitors who are dealing in these matters, or or anybody can deal with it? And that's the one part. The other is, I know unfortunately from experience, that the solicitors usually, they look at you like a cow with big, and they want to milk you. What is it involved? What is it involved when you start these proceedings?
Yeah, do you look at your client?
Let me reply to this. I think your best bet would be to contact a lawyer in Cyprus. I mean, I didn't come here to get cases, let's get that straight. That's not what I'm here. I came in order to discuss these matters. Now, the best approach would be to organize through a relative of yours to make a contact with a lawyer that he has faith in and will not consider him the way you described. And having secured a relationship which you are confident about, then you put it to them. I would like to make this case. They should give you a budget, and you should be able to understand how this is done. And if that budget is not acceptable, you should ask for a second and a third, because my understanding is that most, if not all of these cases, can be done on a contingency basis, in which a certain amount is paid up front, which is returned at the end of the day in exchange of a percentage of the amount recovered. So you look at that, and I can tell you with the numbers I have seen so far, money is not the reason why people are not making these cases.
Well, I got the money because, as I said, unfortunately I got some public clearances from solicitors. But the thing is, I've lived in England for 47 years now. So the times that I go to Cyprus, I'm a stranger between strangers.
Well, ask Lobby, they can help you.
Sorry?
Ask Lobby. I mean, the people who organize this can help you out if you have no contacts in Cyprus.
That's the main thing.
Yeah, I think ask Lobby and they
I'll
can help
speak
you
to you
out.
later. But I should add as well, there are English lawyers that I know in London who have brought cases on behalf of, well, actually, on behalf of English people against Turkey in the European Court of Human Rights. We had about 5 years ago at Lobby, we had a letter from an MP somewhere on the south coast, near Chichester, I think it was. And he said that he had a constituent, an English lady, who had a flat in Kyrenia. The only connection she had with Cyprus was that she had this flat in Kyrenia. She hadn't been able to go there. The Turks wouldn't let her. The Turks wouldn't let her occupy the property. It was being occupied by the Turkish army. She didn't know what to do. She went to her MP. The MP looked on the internet and found at the top of the Cyprus site, Lobby for Cyprus. He wrote to us and said, well, can you help? And we put him and her in touch with an English solicitor, and he has brought the case for her in the European Court of Human Rights. It's one of the cases that is at the moment in the queue, waiting for the ones that Achilleas has talked about to go through. I'm pretty sure that in that case, he is doing this on a contingency fee basis, as Achilleas said. So he is, I think, I'm guessing, but I think she's paid him something like £2,000 or £3,000 to start the case off. After that, she's paid him nothing else. And if she, let's say, gets £500,000, he will then take something like 10% of it. But he's not the only one. There are other ones as well. Well,
going into slightly different territory. I will obviously try and convince my parents to take action. They have a house and land in Famagusta in the fenced-up part of the city. If they don't, do I have a right, as a writer who is writing a book about my childhood in that part of Famagusta, do I have a case against Turkey for denying me access to do my job? Because as a writer, you need to go to a place and research it.
Oh, to access the property?
Yeah. I can't.
You've never lived in Famagusta?
Yes, I have.
Oh, you're a refugee?
Yes, I am, yeah.
Well, why don't you have, I mean, you have a claim for your home in Famagusta.
Well, I have to say my pet.
No, you don't.
Ah.
No. Let's get this straight. Your right to your home does not necessarily mean that you own your home. So if you were a child in '74 and you lived with your parents may have been renting that.
No, they own.
Yeah, but it doesn't matter. Whether they were renting or owning it doesn't change your status. Your status is that since 1974, you have been deprived of your home, whether that home was the ownership or not of your parents. So you do have a claim, and your claim would be moral damages for not being able to enjoy your home for so many years.
and as I remember, Loizido and Arestis, they were awarded moral damages.
50,000 for Arestis, 50,000 euro for Arestis, and £20,000 for Loizido.
And that's moral damages.
Moral. And moral is the mental anguish, the stress that you have not been able to access that property, which actually fits in quite well to your argument that now you're a writer and you even want to research this. So you do not have to be the owner of your home to be able to assert a violation of that right. Of course, it helps if you are the owner, because that also means that your property right has been infringed, but it is not necessary.
Okay, I'm going to ask people who haven't asked a question first, and then I'll come back to you.
Yeah, Mr. Achilleas, how do the Committee of Ministers take their decision? By majority rule, or individual ministers got the right of veto? Because in the case of Loizido, they put it off and off to give it, and we've got two ministers, the Cypriot one and the Greek one, and they seem to agree with this, to put it off and on.
That it took from 1998 until 2003 to get Turkey to understand that it had to pay the compensation awarded. If you look at the statements made by Turkey in 1998, were to the effect that the judgment of the court was political, we shall not abide by this, forget it, no chance, impossible, it will never happen. Yet, 5 years later, they actually paid up with 8% interest. So the reason, yeah, but you know, I've been having this story that everybody is always jumping ahead. You are waiting for Loizido to return to the property in order for you to decide to make the action. That's the argument. You seem to forget that she has collected compensation for loss of use. You seem to forget that she has established the principle that it is her property and that Turkey is violating. And you seem also to forget that the fact that your name is on a title deed means it belongs to you. If all these things are not important, then fine, don't take any action. But I would not like to be in a position to say that people will take an action only when Loisidou returns to Kyrenia. I think there is enough writing on the wall for people to read that this kind of action is important, and just because Loisidou hasn't yet returned doesn't mean that she will not, or it doesn't mean that you shouldn't follow.
Yeah, I don't mean that. I agree with you. But why our minister?
All government is evil. Take
all
that
government
as a
this is Lobby's new slogan for this year. All government is evil. Like,
whereby the Cyprus government won the case against Turkey in May of 2001. But you have said that we're waiting for the Cyprus government to proceed for compensation. Why is that? Can you enlighten us a bit on this case and why?
Why we're waiting is because that's the procedural step that has to be taken. Why the Cyprus government has not taken actions in that is a difficult political answer, which I am not equipped to reply. I don't know. I really can't tell you. I mean, you should ask the Cyprus government about that. No.
Okay. Kyriakou.
Can I just check with you? Can you backdate your claim? If you apply today, can you still go back to 1990 when Turkey signed the convention?
Correct.
And the other point is, we all know about this disastrous Annan plan and doing away with the rights of the refugees. If you actually go to the European Court, like Loisidou, who got the judgment, did that give her more protection than other refugees that didn't?
Well, if you had a judgment, you were one step ahead of everybody else.
From the aspects of, like the Annan plan was approved, thankfully it wasn't. They said if some Turkish was in your house and if he built an extension, and
if we get into the Annan plan, we'll never finish.
Does the European Court, if you get the judgment from the European Court,
yes.
Does that help
you have a judgment from the European Court?
Irrespective of whatever happened in a referendum or whoever is living in it, this is my property, and the European Court is like endorsed my right to this property.
Yeah. Well, what you're asking, I think, is does having a judgment from the European Court of Human Rights give you an advantage when you come to any solution, whether it's called Annan or Achilleas or anything else,
which has a return of some refugees and not others? Does that give you an advantage?
Yes, certainly. I mean, having a judgment, you're one step ahead of everyone else who doesn't have a judgment. It's that simple.
Okay. We're still on the first question from people. Okay.
Don't we have a collective legal case against Turkey? We don't have property. I come from Limassol. Turkey had a right, according to the Zurich Agreement, to invade. But she has no right to occupy it. That's a legal case, it's not a political case. What we do as Cypriots, if you don't believe in the government, as collective Cypriots, is there an international court we can take our legal case?
No.
There isn't.
No. I'm afraid there isn't. I understand the principle, we even looked at it, and I can elaborate this on going for the guarantor powers as well, but that's not the game. The game is at least get the people who are directly affected to do something before we embark on these very interesting and exciting ideas. Here we're at the point where the ones who are actually affected are not themselves taking any action. What you say is an extremely interesting project.
Then maybe we create a court. We tell the United Nations that this is a case of Cyprus that everybody's forgotten about, and there should be a court that the Cypriot people can take their case. What can we do about that? Can
I don't know, I can't advise you.
The lobby of Cyprus can do something about that?
I'll talk to you about it separately because we have been thinking about something very, very similar actually. I think there is a legal route, but I don't want to say anything here because I want to think it through first, but I think there is a legal route. Okay, the gentleman here, do you still want to ask a question?
Yeah, something to do with costs. It's going to make me unpopular with Les, I think.
No, it's you covered me.
Yeah, because I'm stingy. I'd like to know what sort of costing systems you have. You mentioned something about a percentage.
Yeah.
Something about because my English is limited, contingency. what that means as well.
Okay.
But I mean, in any case, the percentage thing, I think a lot of people may feel is a bit unfair, if not even immoral, because why should you take away, I mean, the amount of work I would have thought that you're going to be doing on a piece of property worth 100,000 is more or less the same as the work you're going to be doing on property of 5 million.
Let me turn this around.
Sorry, I would have thought.
Yeah. Do you drive a car?
Do I drive a car?
Yes.
Yeah, clapped out.
He did say you didn't you?
Okay. You choose the car you want to drive, correct?
Yeah.
You can choose the lawyer you want to pick. You go find the lawyer, you talk to him. If you like him, if you agree, you do it. If you don't like him, or if you don't agree, you just don't do it. That's how it works. And these arguments about this way and that way are perfectly acceptable. It is a question of you finding someone you believe that can help you in sorting this matter.
Mess out, yeah.
And there are various ways of doing it. Nick described the structure. The notion of a contingency fee means that if you do not collect, the lawyer doesn't pay.
Yeah, I didn't mention that, I'm sorry.
So don't you get the costs from the defendant?
You get them, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, so in other words, do we pay, if we win, let's say the land is worth $500,000.
Nobody in his right mind will wait for 15 years to get paid. I did it, but nobody else would. Maybe I wasn't in my right mind doing it.
Is that how long it takes then?
I'm sorry?
Is that how long the case takes then?
No, that's how long Loizil took.
But Achilleas is saying that Loizil took a long time because there were so many precedents to establish. But once that's been established, the other ones
should follow. I mean, the numbers that Nick mentioned are numbers that are reasonable the way I see it in the Cyprus market. An amount up front, a fixed amount, which is a one-off payment, which is then returned at the end of the trial, and if it is successful, a percentage on the amount recovered is paid. And that's normally how these things are done. The percentages and the upfront amount is a question for anybody to negotiate with somebody. I mean, you have a cousin, he does it for free. You don't have a cousin, you have to pay.
Okay, I'm going to take, I think, no more than 5 more questions. And I'm going to give priority to people that haven't asked the question. So the lady up here.
Why do you think the European Court welcome the poverty commission?
Because in terms of human rights, it's an improvement. If you have a system which has systematic violations, the way it should have worked is that the court should deal with all these cases and issue these judgments. The court, as a matter of fact, cannot cope with the number of cases that are before it. Therefore, it has to devise other methods to speed up the system through which justice is delivered. One idea was that you decide pilot cases and then you tell the country, look, what you're doing is wrong, fix it. And in order to fix it, certain steps must be taken. A good step is to set up this commission. It is not a bad step. It means that people may have a chance to get back their property or to get compensation. It's not good enough. The way they've done it is not proper, the legal environment is not correct, and there's a million arguments about it. But it is a progress. It is not going back. It's just not good enough.
So if tomorrow 50,000 people apply, then the chance that this would be established perhaps in the next way.
There is a chance that the court may say that it's urgent and might put more pressure on Turkey to get a good commission and not one that will not allow you restoration or peaceful enjoyment of possessions or reasonable amounts which reflect the market value of the property. There is that inherent risk, but I can tell you, we only have 1,500 cases in Strasbourg, so all these numbers about thousands coming in are simply not applicable. Simply. And it's unfortunate. I mean, I find it depressing that we've done so much work, nobody cares. It's very sad.
Still time. Okay.
Yes. My question is about properties
which do not exist anymore, houses which were demolished or destroyed either by the time or deliberately? I put this question because my family had property in a particular area in Cyprus, going back to the 60s, and we also had a house. That particular area, for some peculiar reasons, nobody can explain it yet, it was occupied by the Turkish army in 1964. In 1974, they left the area, but no house is being left. It's demolished, and there is no trace where the house was. The only person who remembers where that house was is myself, nobody else. Now, I assume that there are similar cases in the now occupied part of Cyprus. What is the legal positions for the claimants of this property that does not exist anymore?
Well, the legal position is very simple. Are you going to make an application or not? If the answer is that you're not going to make an application, then the discussion ends. If the answer is that you will make an application, then you get your paperwork together, get your title deeds, and make the application. And then, when the time comes to make your claim for just satisfaction, there will be a question of proof as to whether you can prove that the house was there or not. If you can prove that there was a house there, you will claim loss of the rent. If you cannot prove that the house was there, you will simply get ground rent for the land.
Okay. Right, I think we're going to be coming to an end. Yes, okay.
In the case of that lady writer, how could she prove that she cannot prove she was the owner, that she had the personal belongings, some of them valuable or sentimental? How could she prove that?
She cannot.
My second question is,
she cannot.
My second question is that is put in front of the Court of Human Rights submissions or affidavits, etc. How the court exercises their, how the court decides on a matter of law or on a matter of discretion?
To decide,
but do they decide on a matter of written law or as a matter of discretion of a judge, like in a county court in England?
Both.
Both. Can you appeal against their decision?
You can make a referral for which there is a procedure whereby you have to get leave. It's very unlikely that the referral will be allowed, and it's very unlikely that...
So they have absolute discretion to decide whichever way they
The European Court of Human Rights is the maximum one can get justice in this world. Nothing more. That's the end of the road. The way they fix, the way they decide, is the way they decide.
Okay. We've got two more questions and then we're finishing. Firstly, Angela, and the gentleman in the white shirt. No, firstly, Angela, please. Unless your name's Angela.
As a non-refugee, I've seen lots of people going into the occupied area since the crossings have opened. Do you think that harms in any way people's position in terms of applying to the courts?
Well, the argument is you cannot use your property. You could say you cannot go into the occupied area. The Turks will say, but you can. And you can say, well, I did go and I couldn't use it. And then they say, well, you can use it. And then you just have to prove it. What you're referring to is evidence of the non-ability to use the property. It's a question of pleading it. I mean, if you had gone to the occupied area and you tried to access the fenced-up city of Famagusta, it's a non-starter. If you had gone to see your house and somebody else was living in it, it's evidence. So it's something that you have to deal with. Okay. But it's very difficult to give a general rule. You just have to look at it.
The last question to Angela.
Relevant to the issue. Are you aware of the fact that a group of refugees now, they suing our government for loss of use of property because they're positively discriminated against the other population? For instance, if it's a storm, they compensate the other people, and we lost everything. and our income for 30 years, and we haven't received any penny. And what's your opinion about this condition?
They haven't sued the Cyprus government.
They are going
They
to.
are considering suing the Cyprus
I know that people.
I think there is also some political motivation in it. People can do whatever they like, it's not my problem. But I can tell you one thing, which is correct legally, I think. You cannot claim twice for the same wrong. So if, for example, these people are successful and they claim 1,000, for argument's sake, and they get 1,000 from the Cyprus government because that is the measure of damage they have, they cannot then turn around and ask Turkey for another 1,000 because they have been compensated. I hope that explains.
Okay, well, someone's asking me very politely to make one more question. So I'm going to allow one more question, quick, and then we can finish.
You mentioned that the compensation comes from 1990.
So, yes.
What happened before that?
Can
I go, for example, through the other country, UK from 74 to 90, because they signed the agreement before?
Let's get this straight. The 1990 period is for Turkey in relation to its acceptance of the compulsory jurisdiction of the court. There is a period from 87-90 which relates to the right of individual petition and the acceptance of the Commission's jurisdiction. That's highly complicated, we won't get into that. But whether you're going to sue the guarantors and all that has nothing to do with Strasbourg. It's not an issue with Strasbourg. If you feel you want to do that kind of action, you start with the district court of say Nicosia or Limassol, and you do it. It has nothing to do with the jurisdiction. That is a matter of the Turkish state, because that is when they decided, on their own will, to sign the compulsory jurisdiction of the European Court of Human Rights. It's a prerogative of a state at the time to become a member of the system. Now, new members have to accept it immediately. But don't forget that there is an evolution of the system from the 50s upwards, and it has always increased the power of the individual to attack a state.
Okay, I think that's it. Firstly, I want to thank Achilleas Demetriades for an absolutely superb presentation. You should know that Achilleas came with 2 or 3 weeks' notice, dropped everything to come and give this talk tonight. As I said, he arrived earlier today, flies back tomorrow morning. So he has really put a lot of effort into this, and I really appreciate it on behalf of the lobby. I also appreciate, yet again, the hospitality of Theatro Technis. Thank you very much for that. If you're able to, you can leave a donation for either lobby or Theatro Technis here. The event is free of charge, but if you appreciate it, please show your appreciation. Just a couple of things to remind you of. On Friday, there are 2 events happening, which you may want to participate in. Between 3 o'clock and 6 o'clock in the afternoon, Lobby for Cyprus is organising a vigil outside Downing Street. If you're free to come, please come and join us. It's normally a very well-attended event, but the more people that come, the more the Prime Minister notices our presence. We'll be delivering a petition between 3 and 6 as well, and who knows, you may be able to join us in Downing Street. After that, we will then be walking to Belgrave Square, where the Turkish embassy is. We can't say we're marching to the Turkish embassy, because if we say you're marching, then the police have the ability to stop you. So we're just walking very quickly, singing songs. That's the Federation vigil outside the Turkish embassy, and that starts at 6 o'clock and will go on, I imagine, most of the night. So please come and attend those events. And can I finally thank all of you? It's always very, very hot in here because of the lights. And it's quite a warm evening as well tonight. But thank you very much, all of you, for coming. And can you just one more time show your appreciation for Achilleas? There are drinks and nibbles outside, so please stay a while and join us.